machines became more common, and electric vacuum cleaners. That was a really big deal when they started making vacuum cleaners, because prior to that, if you had a carpet on your floor, which was always a rug, it was never carpeting, you would have a rug, and once or twice a year you'd have to get your rug and take it out and hang it on the clothesline and beat all the dust out of it, because that was really the only way you could get it clean. And so it probably was never really clean, but the invention of the vacuum cleaner was a really big deal for women back then. I brought this along because I remember us using it. Do you know what it is? It's a toaster. And you put this on your stove, and then you prop your little pieces of bread up. You probably never did this, did you?
No.
You really are.
Well, now I can remember having an electric toaster, but you toasted one side, and when you turned the handles down, the bread flipped over, and you toasted the other side.
Yes. But this one, you put them on there, and then when one side gets toasted, you turn them around, and you have toast, and you can actually make 4 pieces at once. That was a really big deal. And you know, I think about the fact, when we moved into our house, it was, like I said, it was on my 4th birthday. And my favorite cake was angel food. And my mother made me an angel food cake. And I can still remember that. I was only 4. We had boxes stacked all around because she was unpacking. They just moved in, and she made me an angel food cake. That takes 13 egg whites, and you have to beat them by hand. I don't think this one even works anymore, but
I still got one.
She made me an angel food cake in the middle of all that mess. That's the kind of mother I had. She was very caring. And I've never forgotten the fact that she made me that cake in the middle of all that mess. But, you know, that's part of how their life was at that time. And, you know, the women tried to be fashionable. They tried to, you know, keep up with their fashions. It was hard for them at that time. You know, and I think about some of the things she told me, and since then I have read about that, like the girls that were wearing the extreme short dresses, the straight dresses. If you recall, they have little spit curls, you know, with their bobbed hair. They wore lots of makeup, which was absolutely shameful at that time. They smoked, they drank. I mean, you know, adults were absolutely horrified at the way that these girls were acting. But one of the things that I recall reading about, and I remember my mother telling me that during that period of time, the look was sort of the little boy look. They didn't want to be big busted or anything like that. They all wanted to look straight and sleek, and they would bind their breasts. They would wrap cloths around their breasts to hold them down so it would look like they didn't have any kind of bust. So they would be stylish to wear these short, skimpy dresses. And I remember her telling me that she had done that. And I just thought that was the weirdest thing in the world. But of course, my family was a rural family. My mother took a job in Fort Wayne when she was 16. She went to live with her aunt in Fort Wayne, and she worked at the Hospital for the Feeble-Minded. That was the name of it, the Hospital for the Feeble-Minded. And she was a nurse's aide there, and she worked there for 2 or 3 years, and every kind of child that they didn't know what to do with, whether it was emotionally disturbed or mentally retarded or what, ended up in that hospital. And it was a very depressing place for her to work because they really didn't do much for the children. It was just a place to put them.
Yeah.
And that was how she worked at that time. So, you know, it wasn't always a great time for everybody. It was hard for people. it was hard on people. It was hard for them to do, just to get by in life, just to, you know, put food on the table and have a halfway decent living. You know, during that period of time, they also discovered insulin. Prior to that, if you had diabetes, they understood that the sugar made it worse, and so they would try to put them on a diet, but they really couldn't do anything for the especially juvenile diabetes, which is the worst kind to have. They had no treatment for that. They did not know what to do for that, and so therefore most children who developed juvenile diabetes died because they didn't know what to do for them. And so they did invent, insulin was found during that period of time, and also the fact that you could treat a severe anemia with iron, and so they would have them eat liver. This was sort of a new discovery at that time. Prior to that, they didn't know what to do with people who had severe anemia, and many of them died. But someone developed the fact that with the iron that you put in your body, that would take care of the anemia. So that was a big deal at that period of time. Something else that came out during the 20s was some of the first forms of birth control. And actually the diaphragm was invented in the 20s. However, it was illegal in many places to use any form of birth control. Some cities even had laws against it. And of course you had some churches that did not believe in birth control, so that made a difference too. But there was actually legal action taken against any women who would be telling other women how to use birth control. That was illegal. Women were arrested for telling other women about this process. My grandmother on my father's side, my real grandmother died when my father was 6 months old. She died of cholera. And his father remarried and had 17 children. So I'd say they weren't using any form of birth control. Doesn't sound like it anyway. But big families were very common, and for one reason, they were common because they didn't know what to do about it. They did not know any methods of birth control that were effective. So it was a hard time for women at that time. If you weren't in the kitchen cooking, you were having a baby somewhere, it seemed like. Anyway, I think about some of the things that they did. They had lots of music during that time. A lot of the songs that we're still familiar with were popular then. I think about Ain't She Sweet, if you remember that one, when the red robin goes bob, bob, bobbing along. That was a really popular song. There were all kinds of funny, happy songs going along in that time. 5'2", Blue Skies, Side by Side, which became popular, I think, when Carol Burnett started singing that on her show. On the Sunny Side of the Street, My Blue Heaven, and then, of course, all the jazz songs, the Al Jolson songs, the songs that were made popular in the Ziegfeld Follies. And so, you know, there were, in some areas, there were lots of big fancy shows going on with big fancy costumes and lots of singing and dancing. And the people in our area, I think, here were just kind of on the fringes of it. They got a little bit of it through, and then as radio became popular, they started memorizing all the songs and singing them. So that was a big time. Some of the other inventions they made during that time was the zipper. B.F. Goodrich came out with a zipper, and it was first used on boots, galoshes, and they would zip up the boots. And so from that time on, the zipper became a really, really popular item in a lot of different places. Let me ask you if anybody has any questions, maybe I can come up with an answer. One of the things I came across was during the 20s, the county was complaining about the fact that each school child in the county that the county supported with all the schools was costing them $14.65 a year, and they thought that was an awful amount of money. Something else that I came across was during World War II, or during World War I, they had a county drive to raise money to send to the federal government to help with the war. And so after they had this drive, they sent $30,000 to the federal government to assist in the war effort. And after the war was over, the government sent back $10,000 to the county that it didn't use. Can you imagine that happening today? Pretty unlikely. But people were very much involved in the war movement. They wanted to help. And as I said, I personally did not realize that World War I was as short as what it was. From April of 1917 to November of 1918. That's a year and a half at the most. And yet it was classified as the war to end all wars. And it was the first war that poison gas was used extensively. And there were 56,000 American boys killed by poison gas, which was put out by the Germans. I don't know if you've studied much about that. It was a type of chlorine gas, and they put it in bombs, and then they would drop it on these areas. And what they were trying to do, and they had to be careful with it because they had to drop it in areas that they weren't going to be in because it contaminated everything. The food, the clothing, everything. It was very common. Every soldier had a gas mask issued to him. And if you knew that a bomb had been dropped near you, the first thing you were to do was to put on your gas mask. They weren't really effective. The gas blinded people. It ruined their lungs. Many of them died later of pneumonia if they didn't die right at the time. And after World War I, it was passed worldwide that chemical warfare was to be prohibited during war. And of course, there's some that, just lately that's been violated in one area. But it was so horrible during that time that they passed a kind of a worldwide resolution that they would never do that again. But it was a type of chlorine gas, and it was very effective. My husband's uncle was named Arbuckle. And I don't know if you're aware of that, but the VFW post here in Seymour is called the Leslie Arbuckle Zimmerman VFW. And that's named after him. There were 3 branches of services and 3 young men that were the first 3 to die from Jackson County. And they named the VFW after those 3 people. And I think that his uncle was killed by chlorine gas. It was used extensively during that period of time. It was a horrible, horrible thing to happen to these soldiers. They wouldn't even know what hit them. And so that was a part of World War I that was really bad. And of course, what they said was, this is the war that ended all wars. We'll never have another world war. But they found out a few years later that they would. So it wasn't the end of everything.